Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. And what you're about to see is a pre-recorded training session we did over in the United States. But be assured that a lot of the material that we cover is really applicable to any automotive application. So just be aware that yes, it is a lot of North American vehicles, but they will apply a lot of the same principles apply over in the UK as well. Now, if you do have any questions, if you're watching this during the premiere, you can just leave it in the chat. We'll be monitoring live chat. If you're watching this after the premiere, then just feel free to leave a comment underneath the video and we'll get to those as we can as well. So my name is Jason Gabrenas. I'm one of Snap-on's diagnostic technical trainers. I've been in the training department since 2013, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep at Snap-on, so I had 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced, in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic needs. Then before I did that, it was 8 years at Subaru. So I worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just became the default diag guy in the shop. So I always ended up having the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come into my bed. Then before that, a bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. So our topic this evening is what we're calling Intro to ADAS. This is a nice high-level introduction to what all is involved with ADAS and talking about a few of the different ways we'll calibrate and do some initializations. So topics for the agenda. So first off, what is ADAS? We'll talk about what it is, what it stands for, how it's laid out, and how it helps us. Then we'll talk about recalibrations and initializations. Now that's really where you're going to spend most of your time with the scan tool on ADAS, is going to be with those recalibrations and initialization. We'll talk through some manufacturer differences and why we need some good information. We'll walk through a sample recalibration procedure on the screen here, and then we'll also walk through a live on tool demonstration of some of the ADAS specific functions within the tool. So with that, first off, we'll start with what is ADAS. So ADAS stands for Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. And these are the systems that have been putting on vehicles the last 5, 6, 7 years. And really the overarching, at least the original goal, was to make vehicles safer. Cause of death, pretty high with traffic accidents. So if we can reduce the amount of accidents, we can reduce the amount of traffic fatalities. That seems like a really good idea. So some examples of where you may have seen that, say adaptive cruise control, forward collision avoidance, rear traffic alert, stability control, lane departure warning system, etc. So these are the systems that we're talking about. So let's look at the front end of this Mercedes, S-Class, E-Class, what have you. Let's see what we have for sensors in the front of this car. So first off, at the top of the windshield, kind of near the rear view mirror, we have a stereoscopic multi-purpose camera. So since it has 2 camera lenses, that means it has depth perception, right? So using 2 eyes to get depth perception, we use 2 camera lenses to get depth perception as well. So that's what that is for. Then we also have infrared night vision sensor in there. So that allows the vehicle to be able to see further at night, right? So your vision, and likewise the cameras, can't necessarily see very far, but an infrared, a thermal heat signature, the vehicle will be able to see a warm object further down the road than with the camera. Camera park sensors. So these are for the surround view system or 360 camera system. So those are cameras mounted all around the car. Looks like we have 1 in each mirror, and we have 1 below the center emblem there. And like I said, that's used for park assistance to make sure there aren't any objects around the outside of the vehicle. Radar collision and adaptive cruise control sensors. So these are generally radar. And in the bumper, we'll see usually it's going to be a shorter range sensor for object detection, maybe to avoid cross traffic, etc. And then the longer range sensor will be that one in the middle, kind of behind the emblem there. That'll give us a longer range, maybe for detecting other automobiles for the adaptive cruise control, right? So generally when we're dealing with radar, there's both long and short range on a car. And then we also have ultrasonic park sensors around in the bumper. So in this vehicle, we have 6 sensors in the front bumper, and that produces an ultra high pitch, ultra high frequency sound wave that bounces off objects, and it gives an alert to the driver if they're getting too close to maybe a curb or trash barrel, perhaps if we're backing up, something of that nature. So those are ultrasonic sensors. And then, of course, there are more additional ECUs and additional sensors underneath the hood of the vehicle. And I'll tell you what, this is just the front end. The back end, looks very similar, right? So we have cameras and radars and ultrasonic sensors in the rear of the vehicle as well. So imagine this vehicle gets in a collision. That might not necessarily be a simple repair, would it? I can't just necessarily just hang some body panels and spray it with some paint and be good to go. You probably need to replace and calibrate some of these sensors, some of these systems. So back in the beginning of these ADAS development, the engineers were thinking about it, and they said, well, we need to be able to have the car know what's going on around it. So it needs to be able to detect other objects, right? So in order to detect other objects, what is something we already have that already exists that we can maybe adapt to a car and make it be able to see objects? And they thought, well, radar. We've been using radar for a long time on other applications. Let's attach it to a car and do some experiments and see what happens. So sure enough, they started experimenting with radar, and they figured out pretty quick that yes, radar is pretty good at detecting things, but it's not good at telling you what that thing is. Is it a ball? Is it a squirrel? Is it a tree? Is it another car? I'm not really sure, but it's about this big and it's this far away, right? So radar is really good at distance and relative size, but it's not really good at telling you exactly what that is. So they decided pretty quickly that maybe they need to augment the radar somehow. So in order to do that, they added cameras to the vehicle. So that's where we have our cameras come into play. Cameras don't have much of a range as radar, but it'll help us discern what exactly is going on. So this is a little 10-second loop of a video. And what we see on the right-hand side is what your eyes would see or what the camera would see. If we look on the left-hand side, that would be the data points that this visual turns into. So we see the yellow markers are all of the pedestrians. You can see it recognizes stop signs, it recognizes vehicles, and it also can tell you whether the vehicle is moving towards you or what direction the vehicle is moving. You can see the green box if it's moving, purple if it's moving slower. So this is just kind of what the car would see on the left-hand side as far as data points with that camera. What else do we use a camera for when it comes to these systems? Well, for detecting lane markers, right? So as long as we have decent lane markers on the road, it'll be able to detect and see whether or not the vehicle is within its proper lane. And I don't know if you've ever driven one of these vehicles before with lane departure alert or warning, but depending on how the system is, if you start drifting, maybe the steering wheel vibrates, or maybe there's a beep inside the car, maybe there's a flashing red light on the dash. I know on like a GM truck, you'll have the seat vibrate. If it goes to the right side vibrates, left side vibrates. Some of the newer vehicles with electronic power steering will also be able to steer you back. So you start drifting to one side and the vehicle will take the wheel and kind of move you back into your lane. That'll help you if you start drifting. People fall asleep at the wheel, other reasons that people aren't paying attention to the road as well. So that's just yet another safety factor. And it can also bleed into eventually maybe those self-driving cars, which is another advantage of having all this automation on a vehicle. Maybe one of these days we can have that fully automated self-driving car. Also want you to remember that there are 6 main sensor types that we're going to use on a vehicle, or at least sensor packages, so to say. It really breaks down to 3 actual sensors, but maybe 6 different packages. So we have the forward camera, we have the forward radar, usually there's long and short range of those, a rear camera, 360 view and bird's eye view camera, so those will be around the vehicle, side view and blind spot monitoring. Once again, there's maybe a long range and a short range radar in the rear of the vehicle, and then park assist, which is those ultrasonic sensors we saw earlier. So really out of these 6, it breaks down to camera, radar, and ultrasonic sensors, right? So having all of those is just in different formats around the vehicle. Also remember that multiple features in ADAS will leverage a variety of sensors. So let's say in this example I have on the screen here, maybe the adaptive cruise control, the lane departure warning, and the forward collision warning all need input from that high-mounted camera in the windshield. And then for some reason or another, that camera stops working, fails, what have you, then those 3 systems will cease to work because they all need input from that one camera, right? So one sensor or uh, one component failing could make multiple other systems on the vehicle fail. And that is why we want to focus on pre and post scan on every vehicle. Now, what you do when you do a pre-scan for the vehicles, it will scan all the modules on the vehicle and return any codes that are in those modules. This is especially important for vehicles with ADAS. Some vehicles with ADAS may have a code stored, but it may not turn a light on the dash. It may not have a light even associated with it on the dash. So maybe it just might simply not work, may have a malfunction, and we may not know unless we scan through all the modules. Instead of just simply going one module at a time, let's scan them all, right? And then when we're done with our repair, we want to do a post scan. We want to make sure we scan all modules again, make sure there are no codes left over, and the vehicle essentially has a clean bill of health. This is critical in body shops, collision realm, because most insurance companies require this now in order for the insurance claim to be correct. So we need to do a pre-scan and a post-scan on the vehicle. Also, it's just good, even if you're not in the body shop world, if you're in the just general repair space, that's also good for your customers, right? You can say, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, here is a report of everything we found with your vehicle. And then once it's complete, here is a verification that everything is now fixed and back to the way it should be on your vehicle. No more codes. All your readiness monitors are passed. You're good to go. Now, as far as Snap-on's concerned, we've been doing pre and post scan in our scan tool since 2014. That is 6 years. Holy moly. That's been a long time. We've been doing full pre and post scan, but then we've enhanced it over the last few years, also with our free cloud service, which we'll talk about a little bit later when I go live on the tool. So next, let's talk about recalibrations and initializations. If we think about a diagnostic workflow, and we're going through and repairing or diagnosing a vehicle, it's good to have a standardized workflow to kind of walk through. Gives you that way we don't miss any steps, right? So first off, we would like to do a pre-scan like we just discussed, right? We want to pre-scan on the vehicle, make sure we check all modules for codes. Once we've done that, we'll need to go to our diagnosis step, right? We'll need to figure out what is causing the problem on the vehicle. Now, in some cases, especially with ADAS, it could be pretty simple, right? It could be the vehicle was in a collision and the sensor is in 100 pieces on the ground. That's pretty obvious where the problem is, but there could still be an underlying wiring issue, something of that nature. So we want to make sure we do our due diligence and have a complete diagnosis. Then once we've diagnosed it and determined what the problem is, we then would want to repair the problem, right? So we either replace the sensor, repair the wiring, whatever needed to be done in order to repair the problem. Then after that, especially on ADAS, we would probably need to do some sort of a recalibration or reset on the system. ADAS, it's very critical for most of these systems to have some sort of function, but also could be something like replacing an oxygen sensor on a GM vehicle. You need to recalibrate that. You need to reset the heater circuit, right? So many different systems need recalibrating, but especially ADAS. And then once we're done with that, we may take a road test drive cycle, and then we want at the end to verify there are no codes left in the vehicle. For our purposes in this presentation, we are going to be focusing on that recalibrate section in there. So we'll talk about resets and relearns. So really when it breaks down for ADAS, it breaks down to 3 different methods of recalibrating the system. So we have a static, a dynamic, and an initialization. Now, for some of you, some of this might be just this new information and it might seem super complicated and something foreign. But really, if you break it down, you may, if you've spent any amount of time with a scan tool, you've probably done some of these functions already on a scan tool. They just might have been called something different. So first off, a static recalibration. So that is the vehicle stationary in the bay. Usually there's a target involved where it has to aim at a target a certain distance away in order to calibrate. So how that would work with a scan tool is you're going to go in, you're going to select the recalibration, then you walk through some steps. Maybe the step says measure this distance, and maybe you put a mark on the floor, maybe you put this target this many feet away. And then as you walk through the steps, you eventually get to the actual test itself, where you're going to start the reset procedure or the recalibration procedure. That is very similar to just performing a functional test. Say I needed to relearn a throttle body on a car. That's a functional test that's very similar to the way we would go through and do a static recalibration. So it's just a functional test, perhaps with additional steps and perhaps some special tools. Next, we have a dynamic recalibration. So a dynamic recalibration, how that works is we hook up the scan tool, basically puts the vehicle in a relearn mode, and then we drive the car under set conditions. So let's say it needs to be between 35 and 55 miles an hour, no harsh acceleration, no harsh braking, no lane changes, right? That sounds an awful lot like doing an OBD2 drive cycle for emissions, right? Very, very similar. We're driving a vehicle under set conditions. So it's very similar to a drive cycle. And then in initialization, we're just simply entering information using the scan tool. So perhaps we have to program a VIN. Perhaps we have to just put in some sort of a teaching code. Or perhaps it's very easy and we just click a little button on top of the screen that says reset and it's done. The module does it itself. So that would be just any type of reinitialization that you may do on other sensors on the car. I bring back to that GM oxygen sensor heater reset I talked about a couple minutes ago. That's a simple reset. You click a button on a screen and it resets itself, right? So that's our initialization. So static, dynamic, and initialization. So what do I need for a static recalibration? First off, you need a scan tool with the proper coverage for the system you have. If you have a snap-on scan tool with recent software, you're probably in pretty good shape because we've actually won some awards with our coverage that we have for ADAS. So it is definitely industry-leading coverage in there. And you also most likely need proper recalibration targets and fixtures to hold those targets. Because like I said, with static recalibration, almost always it will be a target involved. Now, if we look at the picture on the screen on the right-hand side, that is Snap-on's easy ADAS calibration system. Comes with multiple targets to work with multiple vehicles. Also uses lasers to find center lines, etc. It's actually very quick and easy system to use. Played a video for it at the beginning if you were around. So here's an example on a Honda Accord. For a static recalibration, you'll see those three targets a distance away. Now those are Honda targets. So of course you could also go to the OEM to get these targets as well. What do I need for a dynamic recalibration? Well, once again, you need that scan tool with the proper coverage and drive in what we call a target-rich environment until it completes and follow the instructions from the manufacturer. So what I mean by a target-rich environment would be other objects that vehicle can measure. So other vehicles on the road, perhaps some buildings, good lane markers, that sort of thing. We want to have a good amount of targets for it to measure. If you're just in a wide open field on a straight flat road, doesn't really have anything to measure, calibration could take a long time. If I have other vehicles around, I have other buildings, I have good lane markers, it'll take considerably less time to do that. So here's just an example from a 2014 Cadillac SRX. So that is a 6-year-old car at this point. All right, so let's see, it says it should take 10 to 30 minutes to complete, and vehicle speed needs to be greater than 35. Avoid extreme accel or decel. Follow one or more vehicles. Typical traffic is fine, but vehicles 100 to 165 feet away are most effective at decreasing our calibration time. So the more objects it has to measure, the faster it will be. All right, drive on a straight road with many stationary objects at the side of the road. So that's just one example. How about alignments? Alignments are critical when it comes to ADAS because ADAS and alignments are pretty well tied at the hip together, especially the center line, the thrust angle of that vehicle. Because if you think about many of the sensors on that vehicle are going to be lined up off that center line. So we think about if that thrust angle is off, left or right, by 1 degree. 1 degree doesn't seem like much. But if we go 100 yards down the road, that 1 degree now turns into 5 feet off to one side or the other because of distance and angles. So if you imagine it's off by 1 degree over to the driver's side, well, 100 yards down the road, that radar beam that's in the center of the vehicle is now pointed 5 feet to the left. And what's 5 feet to the left on a 2-lane road? Well, that's the oncoming traffic, right? So what does that radar see? Well, it sees oncoming traffic. It sees obstacles. And it doesn't know it's not calibrated correctly or the vehicle's not aligned correctly. And maybe some weird things might happen. Maybe it taps the brakes every once in a while. Maybe it starts beeping at the driver, what have you. So imagine trying to trying to go through that sort of drivability problem, right? Oh man, my car just keeps going like this and bucking. And is it a misfire? Is it a transmission problem? No, it ends up being the alignment was off, right? So that's a possibility that you want to make sure you watch out for. So just be aware that alignments are critical. Often, even to do an alignment on a car nowadays, we have to calibrate these systems just as part of the alignment process itself. And information varies by OEM. So let's talk about manufacturer differences and why we need good information. So I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, so let's talk through it. So we look at the first column here, this olive green column. This would be, what would we consider the generic term for the system to be? So things like collision warning indicator, automatic emergency braking, lane departure alert, lane assist, adaptive cruise control, etc. So let's go across and see what the manufacturers say. So we'll use automatic emergency braking. Ford calls it active city stop. Toyota calls it pedestrian detection. Chevy calls it low speed front automatic braking. Nissan calls it intelligent forward emergency braking with pedestrian control. Boy, that's a mouthful. Honda calls it forward collision warning, etc., etc., etc. So even across the manufacturers, they can't decide what to call it. Now, oftentimes, I'd imagine the marketing department probably gets involved and they say, well, let's call it this. It sounds nice, right? But could make it hard to find for the technician going through the scan tool. And if you have a Snap-on scan tool, you may have noticed in the last few years, we started categorizing the systems across the vehicle because they can't seem to name speedometer the speedometer, right? They call it some other sort of weird thing, or active city stop for automatic emergency braking, etc. So that's one of the reasons why we started categorizing the system. And then even on the same manufacturer, it can be a different procedure, a different process, depending on what part we're working on. So here's an example, 2016 Ford, in that red box right there. So the forward camera in that is a dynamic. We drive it down the road. Rear view camera, 360 camera, those are static with side radar and forward radar, those are both initializations. And then park assist, ultrasonic, and camera involved there. It's a static with camera calibration. So even on the same manufacturer, you can't necessarily assume that it's going to be the same type of situation. So you just want to make sure you know what you're getting into before you start. So obviously we need access to these necessary procedures. Now I know Shopkeep Pro and Mitchell have a wealth of that information in there. There's even a whole table just for ADAS right from the main menu there, or manufacturers' websites. If you have a subscription to a manufacturer, that's not a bad way to go either, because that's, hey, straight from the horse's mouth, right? You want to make sure you follow those instructions very carefully to the T. Do not skip any of those directions. If it tells you to cycle the key, cycle the key. If it tells you to take the key out, do that. Because if you miss a step, the calibration may fail. And worst case, you probably just have to do it again. But we want to make sure we're following the steps 100% to the T carefully, because these are safety systems. We want to make sure we're being safe. So here's a little real scenario, walk you through one of these types of calibrations here. This is on a 2017 Genesis G80. Now, if you haven't heard of a Genesis as a car brand, it's actually spun off from Hyundai a few years ago. Hyundai had their high-end car was the Hyundai Genesis. Then they actually spun it off to its own standalone luxury brand a few years ago. So there's a few different models, the G70, G80, G90. On this case, we have a 2017 G80, and it had been in a collision. So the body shop had replaced the radar unit because it had been damaged. So now it needs to be calibrated. So how are we going to do that? Well, first off, we have manufacturer's information here. This is right out of Shopkeep. So if we look on the left-hand side, we need to make sure first the car is level. And then once the car is level, we take a level gauge or an angle gauge and make sure that that sensor is vertical, perpendicular to the ground, right? So we want to make sure that the beam is perfectly horizontal. Then we will also check the horizontal kind of left to right adjustment, just to make sure that that is pretty close to level. There's a couple or maybe a degree or two to either side that it's okay within spec, because that's less critical than having it horizontal going to the ground there. So now we get into some pictures. This is our friend Mike down in South Carolina. He's a mobile tech, and this is what he does for a living. So he helped us out with this case study here. So here he is with his digital angle gauge on the left-hand side there, and showing us that it is 90 degrees perpendicular to the ground. Now on the right-hand side, we have our angle gauge. Look like it's down to the left a little tiny bit, 0.2 of a degree. That is well within spec, so we're in good shape there. Now we need to, once it's set up, we need to reset or relearn the system. So some of our scan tools now have our service resets and relearns broken out for us right on the main menu of the vehicle. So you don't even have to go into the module. You can just find them all in one central location. So it looks like there's 19 different service resets and relearns on this Hyundai. Let's go in there and see. So you'll see they're also categorized by category, as I said before. And these are also broken down more by job than by sensor type, right? So replace or calibrate front radar. Well, we just replaced the front radar, so that's where we're going to go. So Brent comes in here. If we have experience-based real-world data on the top repairs, we'll have a graph there. And then if there are any TSBs applicable from the manufacturer, that'll be on the second block. Looks like there aren't any TSBs for this either. So we'll go right to that functional resets and calibration, because that's what we're really concerned about anyways. Once we click that, it'll pull back any functional resets or calibrations for that job on that vehicle. Looks like in this case, we have just one. So we'll go into SCC alignment calibration. So SCC is smart cruise control. So the purpose of the function is to align the sensors if sensors are replaced, or if the vehicle has an accident with structural damage that required wheel alignment. When this needs to happen is when the radar sensor is replaced, which it was, or in case of light contact accident or strong shock against the sensor, if front vehicle is not detected while running on the road, so we have no indication that it's detected the vehicle in front of us, or if the angle sensor has been replaced or calibrated. We need to make sure there are no DTCs in the system and make sure that the ignition is on. Now, this was kind of interesting the first time I saw this. I thought this was kind of nice how they give you the parking mode and running mode. So parking mode would be a static recalibration and running mode would be a dynamic recalibration. So you have your choice as to which one you want to do. So in this case, Mike's a mobile tech, so maybe he didn't necessarily have base space available for him that day. So he said, well, let's just do a dynamic test driving down the road, right? So we go into running mode. Then it gives us some parameters that we need to follow. So we need to make sure the radar sensor is there. We need to make sure it's perpendicular. Turn on the key, connect diagnostic tool, and execute the alignment adjustment. And to make sure the warning light on the cluster turns on, and then we drive 50 kilometers an hour for 10 to 15 minutes. So those are our conditions. We'll hit continue. And then this also I thought was kind of an interesting little thing too. So in this case, it says the driving mode sensor alignment calibration process has started. You may now disconnect the scan tool from the vehicle and vehicle. So I thought that was kind of nice. If you have maybe a shop where you have just one shared scan tool, so you don't have to have that tool in the vehicle for 10 or 15 minutes driving it. You can simply leave it at the shop and you'll be able to do the calibration. I thought that was kind of a nice little thing. So we can hit continue again. And then you see here's a picture of the dash. So before we get started, there's the warning light on the dash that'll light up. Once that warning light goes out after driving the vehicle, we know that the calibration is complete. Then we can turn on the cruise control. We also get an indication of other vehicles or lane markers on the road as well. So we know that the system is now working properly with all that. Then, of course, once we're done, once we've done that road test, we want to come back and we want to make sure that we do a post scan to make sure there are no codes left over in the vehicle. And of course, looking at this screen right here, I have a bunch of green circles and everything is good. No codes found. All right, so let me switch over to our live on the tool part. All right. Just a reminder, if you joined us late, so if you have, if you're on Zoom watching this, just make sure if you have any questions throughout, you can click on the Q&A. Should be on the top or bottom of your screen. Just leave a question in there. I'll get to them at the end. Looks like chat's being pretty active too. I don't really have a chance to check it right this yet, but if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to add questions in the chat and we will address those at the end as well. Actually, looks like a few people on there are actually helping us out and answering questions for me too, so I appreciate that. All right, so up on my screen, we should see my home screen for my Zeus. So I'm going to go and show a few of the different ADAS specific functions of the tool. So let's go into Scanner and ID a vehicle. Now this comes up every time on the tool, and it's just kind of a nice little reminder. We don't want to necessarily just blow by this unless we know that we have our key on before we plug into the vehicle. The reason being is this is how the instant ID function works the best. We want to make sure the key is on first before we connect the tool. So once the tool sees power, it is going to try and find a VIN inside the module. If the key is off, it's still going to see power down pin 16 on the OBD2, but the module won't be on, so it won't be able to pull out the VIN, right? So we want to make sure the key is on first before we attach the tool. So let's hit continue and just go past that now that we've talked about it. Another thing that's been added to the software in the last couple updates would be up on top here. We have our last 4 vehicles ID'd with the tool. That's just nice if you have to switch back and forth, maybe scan a vehicle in the morning, need to pull it back in the afternoon, that sort of thing. Maybe if it's a shared tool, once again, you can go back through the last 4 vehicles. I'm going to just load my demo vehicle right from the bottom here. So I'll go to demonstration and we'll go to Chevy Tahoe, good old Chevy Tahoe, and come to this screen, the vehicle confirmation screen. So this is new in the last update. So this came in the spring on 20.2 update on the Zeus and the Verus Edge. And this has a room for entering odometer or mileage and license plate number, right? So I will plug in 65,000 miles, let's say. And then license plate number, let's call it ABC123. Right, so you're able to plug all those in. If you had used instant ID, the full VIN would be populated here, or auto ID, the full VIN would go as well. This is just year, make, model, so we just have year, make, model. You could also manually type the VIN in here if you wish to do so. All of this information will appear on any reports we generate with the tool, which we'll be talking about in a minute. So that pre and post scan for sure, and then also the ADAS report we'll talk about in a second. So make sure that information's in there, and we'll hit OK. Tells me into demonstration mode. I hit continue, and here we are on the main page for the vehicle. Now, let's just say we walk through a whole procedure. Maybe let's say we replaced a windshield on this truck, or the windshield was replaced by somewhere else, because I'm not a glass shop, but maybe you are. So where do I go to reset the camera? Well, the easiest way to do it, like we saw in the presentation part, was service resets and relearns. Looks like there's 20 different service resets on this vehicle, so we'll just go in there. And once again, it's vehicle-specific shortcuts, TSBs, functional resets, a top repairs graph, and quick access to repair information. So I'll click give it a try here, and we'll take a look at what we have. Looks like, under engine, there's 8 different resets. Body, there's 1. Brakes, there's 4, etc. It's going to vary by year, make, model. But I'm going to scroll down to my driver aids and ADAS category, and we have a replace or adjust outside view camera. And we know when we change the windshield on this vehicle, we have to adjust the camera or recalibrate the camera anyway. So I'll go in there. Okay, so it looks like no vehicle-specific user experience data. It's fine. Looks like there's a couple of TSBs. I'm not really concerned about those right now because I know I just need to go and do a calibration. So we'll go into calibrations. And once again, when we press that button, the tool looks in the module to find any calibrations related to this problem or this repair. In this case, we get 1, but I've seen up to 6 different possible calibrations depending on the system we're working on. So we'll just bring any applicable tests. So in this case, we have a functional reset for vehicle direction camera learn. So we'll go in there. And it says, the first thing it says is see service information for calibration procedure and driving conditions. So this brings us back to why do we need good information? Sometimes the information's in the tool. We try really hard to get a lot of that information in the tool, but it doesn't always happen. So in that case, well, I'll just hit exit right here because I want to go see what I need to do before I go through this test. Okay, so if we look at the top left of the screen, there is a link for repair information. Now, this is a link to optional ShopKey Pro or Mitchell Pro Demand information. So if you have a subscription to either of those services, it will log you in, it will log the vehicle in, and it will also do a search for this repair. Since it's a demo vehicle, we have to give it a few more options here. And we'll go in. You'll notice I'm logged in and I'm on my search results page now. So it's searched for outside view camera, which is what we're working on. Now, if you see, I get a couple different types of results. Over here on the left side, that'd be my OEM only results, right? So straight from the OEM based on that search. Over on the right-hand side will be my OEM information as well as information from our experience-based SureTrack information. Over 1.3 billion repair orders feed that information. So we might be able to see, in this case, it's a replacement, maybe it was an adjustment, whatever it happens to apply to that term. So you will get your best results if you stay to that right-hand side. Just kind of help you drill down and make that information a little more applicable to your situation. Once we do that, we get our search result cards. So these are, I like to call these category cards, right? Because these are different categories of information. So it's laid out in this format. Whatever cards are shown on the screen, there's information for that search term. So we can have up to about 16 different cards on the screen at any one time. Could have 1 or 2, could have 10. It will vary depending on the search and the information. It also gives us, if we look at this, it gives us kind of a diagnostic workflow. So if we read this page like a book, top to bottom, left to right, start with TSBs, and we just work our way down, we'll get all our information pretty much in the order we would want to have it for our repair, right? So we go all the way down through here, and then we get to our removal and replacement, and then we get to our after repair info, which is where I want to go. After repair info, we'll have any of our resets, calibrations, relearns for that vehicle from the manufacturer. So we'll go to after repair. All right, and I want to do a calibration. So we have a couple quick links up here. I just want to jump straight to the calibration. So I'll just click that. It'll jump me down the page a little bit. So it's to calibrate the front camera, operate the vehicle in the following conditions until the calibration is complete. Clean the windshield. That's important. We want to make sure the windshield is clean because we want to be able to see through it. Avoid lane changes. Maintain vehicle speed between 35 and 56. And ensure the road contains visible references, well-defined lane markings, curbs, etc. Other vehicles would probably help too. Okay, great. So I know now, how am I going to go through this? Now I can go back to my scanner. So we go right up to the top, we go to scanner again, and then we can go right back into that functional test. Right, see service information, already did that. And then it brings us up to our functional reset. Now, a nice Snap-on exclusive that we have here that some people might not even think about or take into consideration is we have data on the screen when we're doing a functional test, right? So we can actually see changes in real time as we're making these changes. So all I have to do is go up to the top. In this case, I would hit learn, and then I would drive the vehicle on the road under the conditions that were in my service information. Now, in this case, it's a demonstration vehicle, so we don't have any actual data populated here because we're not hooked up to a car. But some possible PIDs you might want to look out for is, say, camera learn status. Has it been learned yet? Or maybe a front camera learn mode progress as a percentage. So is it 50% done? Is it 80% done? That sort of thing. So it gives us those extra data points just to make it a little easier on us as we go. So let's say we've driven the vehicle. Camera learn is complete, 100%, all good to go. Once we are good to go, we just hit exit. And it brings us back to our resets and relearns. Go back one more time, brings us to our full list. Back one more time, brings us to the top of the vehicle. Now, another thing I'd like to call to your attention from here. You may have noticed it earlier, you may not have, but up on the right top corner, we have this ADAS report lit up here. When we first came into the vehicle, that was grayed out. We couldn't select it. The thing that triggers this report to generate is if I go in and do a ADAS type recalibration. So it has to be one of the ADAS systems. So I go in here, and here's the report that generates. Now we see all of this information can be added in the tool under our shop information. And then we see down here, we have our vehicle information. So 2016 Tahoe, odometer, license plate. If we had the full VIN in there, that would populate there as well. And then we have our date and timestamp for when we actually did this test. And then it tells us what system we worked on. And we could print this out, a little print button on the top left. Since it is a Windows-based tool, we can do that. And then we could put in maybe any input values necessary. I know on some cameras, they need to have the target maybe 2,500 millimeters away or what have you. You can put that in there. Results, what happened with the vehicle? Well, it said it calibration complete. Or we can do a pass fail. Any equipment used and additional notes, might want to note that down. Technician name, signature, any certifications if applicable, and then the date that we did it. So we can fill all that out. Be useful for maybe an insurance company might want documentation as to, well, did you go through and actually perform these calibrations on this car? Did you say you did? So you can go, it's automatically generated from the vehicle. You can't make this up. It has to be generated by actually doing the test. Right. And if we did multiple, we would just have multiple line items on this as well with the same input values and results, etc. So next thing I want to do, once I've viewed this, I could print it, as I said, and I want to save it. So when I save it, it disappears. Where'd it go? I went to two different places. it got saved to the tool, and it also went one other place. So if I go down to the bottom of this screen here, we have a little file folder with a car. I click on that, that brings up my vehicle record screen here, right? So it's got my vehicle, mileage, license plate. I can put customer's name in, etc. You see I have an attachment here in my ADAS report. If I double click on that, it will open up, and that looks just like it did on the screen before. It's just opened up in an Adobe Reader, so I can look at it, months from now if I wanted to. So I could print it from here. Also note, next to the report, there's a blue cloud with a check mark in it. That blue cloud with a check mark means it has uploaded to the cloud service and it's all set. So it's checked off, right? So how would I get to that? Well, I could open any web browser and go to altusdrive.com. As long as I have a free account, I can do that. Also, since I'm on a Zeus and Verus are Windows-based tools, and we have the Snap-on Cloud option. And click on that, it was going to load into my Snap-on Cloud account, and it loaded. I was in this a little earlier today. So there is my ADAS calibration report that just uploaded a little while ago, right? So in Eastern time, it's 8:40 p.m. And I can click on this. It will open up, give me some information down here, automatically generates these searchable tags. So if I have 1,000 different reports and screenshots and what have you in here, I can just search by vehicle, year, make, model. I could also maybe type in, let's say the license plate number, right? So I could just do that, and that'll become a searchable term on the bottom too. This just allows us to easier access to search here, right? So I can also click on it on the top. It will open in a new window, and I could print it from here. All right, so as I said, this is accessible from anything with a web browser. So my scan tool that has Windows installed on it, my laptop, my desktop, my tablet, my phone, right? Anything with an internet connection and a web browser, you can browse this this system. That also helps if you have a Mac, or you can just do this on a Mac as well. So also on here, you see you got a little link. If I click on that link, it'll generate a shareable web link that I can share with my customer, my insurance company, what have you. There's three options. First one's grayed out. We'll talk about that in a second. Second one is send via email. So if I have this open in a web browser on a machine that has a default email program installed, say Outlook or Windows Mail, right, built into the machine, it will open my default email program. It will compose a new email, and it will paste that link in there. Right? Pretty easy. All I really have to do is just type in the email address I want it to go and hit send. Next one's copy to clipboard. So it'll just copy that link to the device's clipboard. I can then paste it wherever I'd like to. So maybe I want to put it in an email if I'm using, say, Yahoo or something like that. Or maybe I want to put it in a shop management program, right, as a note on my repair order. Or maybe in a body shop, I put it in my estimation software as a link. That way they're tied together, and then you can access it later on down the road. And then the top one here says send via SMS. That's grayed out. The reason it's grayed out is because I don't have this open on a phone. Remember how I said we could do this on a phone? So if we were on a phone, that would be lit up. We click on that. It opens up my default messaging program, whatever that happens to be, and it will compose a new SMS message, which is a text message. And then I can simply put in the phone number I want it to text it to and text it off that way. So multiple ways we can print, we can share. We have these records. It uploads automatically as long as we have current software and a Wi-Fi connection. And the best part is it's free. All you have to do is set up an account, link your tool. Super easy to do, and you'll be good to go. So that is our vehicle-specific or our tool-specific ADAS features there. And with that, that is our time here today. So make sure you tune in for new diagnostic content every week. We will be premiering a new video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time. So make sure you check it out on the YouTube channel. If you're watching, well, of course, you would be watching this on YouTube, but make sure you subscribe, thumbs up, ring the little notification bell so you know anytime we post new content. And it's youtube.com/SnapOnDiagnosticsUK. With that, time for questions. If you have any questions, just feel free. Once again, if you're watching this on a premiere, just leave it in the live chat and we'll answer those. Otherwise, leave a comment under the video and we will get to those as we monitor those comments as well. I'd like to thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to learning a little bit more about how you might be able to be more efficient at diagnosing vehicles using some of the information that we've given you today. Hopefully, we'll see you next week. Hopefully, you can watch and see you on any of our other videos. Have a good week, have a good night, and take care.